Welcome to the Magical Salon, where two regular people, Amanda and James, explore mystical ideas and big questions. From books to pop culture, if it's a doorway to something deeper, we're probably into it. We're not experts, and maybe you aren't either, but that's kind of the point. Welcome back to the Magical Salon. I'm your pupil, Amanda, and I'm joined by
your guide, James.
This week, we're diving into the role of teachers in a spiritual journey. From church to classrooms to the field, teachers, coaches, and mentors can have a profound impact on our experiences and can help us grow. But are they required, or can you get to the same place without them? So to start us off here, what is the role of a teacher in general? Just to sort of think on a broader scope, even beyond a spiritual capacity. What is the role of a teacher, and what sort of qualities does a good teacher embody?
It's an interesting question because most of the time you just have a teacher in class. You don't really think if they're good or if they even have good qualities for being a teacher. Specifically in the education system, it's just some person working a job. But I feel like one of the things that stood out to me when I was doing some prep for this is really what you need a teacher, a coach, a mentor for is at some level honesty, to give you honest feedback so that you can then incorporate, because you don't want somebody to just be a critic, which there's plenty of criticism to go around in the world. What you need is somebody that's able to help be honest with feedback so that you can improve. So like constructive criticism, a teaching moment, helping you learn something rather than correcting. So there's a difference in my mind between teaching and grading, which I think in the modern world, a teacher just gives a grade, but a true teacher, you're instilling a lesson or value into the child or the person in whatever it is that may be. That's kind of what I'm thinking. You have more experience teaching though than I do. So what do you think?
I mean, I don't think experience teaching really has an impact. I think everyone can have an opinion on what constitutes a good teacher, regardless of whether you have taught, because you've had teachers, right? Well, just to go back to what you were saying, there's a difference between punishing and guiding. And I think that's where the role of the teacher diverges from the role of a parent per se, because the parent obviously teaches their kid a lot of stuff. However, a teacher is a distinct role from a parent. And it's not saying that parents don't teach their kids things. It's just a way for you to get guidance on a specific aspect of your life in a way that a parent can't give you. But I think, in my opinion, the best teachers change the way that you see the world. I think a teacher kind of gives you a toolbox, and then you can open the toolbox and go around and use what's in the toolbox to further your own life and skills. So I think a good teacher introduces new ideas and guides you through questions so that you arrive at the conclusion, which is very distinct. A lot of people think a teacher is just someone that stands up there behind a podium and they just lecture at you for an hour or 2 hours. That is a method of teaching, but I don't think that's an effective method of teaching. They're supposed to guide you through the work. Like when you go on a hiking path, the path is already there because somebody has created it for you. You just have to walk it. That's what a good teacher does. They show you the path and how to get on it and complete it safely.
Well, just on that note of the path and guiding. So one thing that I thought was interesting is I believe it's the word sensei, pretty much direct translation of sensei is one who has gone before. I just thought that was a very interesting term because specifically a sensei, you think of a martial art like karate teacher or kung fu or judo or whatever. I always associate that with a fighting thing, but it also means they are able to do the moves. And you can read about how to do a move or, oh, if you do a karate chop in this way, that's how you do it. But until you actually do it yourself, it's just words on a page. You haven't experienced it. So to your point, it's about giving you real skills or teaching you personally so that you know something or how to do something. And that sounds easy, but you can read about how to ride a bike, but until you have ridden a bike, you don't really know how to do it. It's something that you have to put a lot of conscious effort into initially to learn anything. And a teacher is kind of helping guide you how to think through it, like to process. I have to pedal this way, that way, lean this direction, or even a car. There's a lot of stuff. After a certain point, you learn it and then it just becomes automatic. You don't need to know how to do it. You don't have to consciously think about doing something, but you need a teacher to get you to that point where you don't need to be consciously thinking about how to do certain things anymore, specifically in a sensei setting or driving a car. I guess for math, they have to teach you the thought process or the way of thinking through things. So again, they're kind of giving you a mental map for your example of a toolbox, a mental toolbox of ways of thinking, so that you can then apply what you've learned. Because that's the thing. The real world is not a math problem where it's very concrete. These are my parameters. These are the constraints. Solve for X. There's a lot of different variables in the real world. So you have to be able to take things that you've learned and apply them to actual problems versus theoretical paper problems that don't exist in the real world.
I also think that a big component of being a good teacher is a passion for the work. Not just a passion for teaching, which I do think is important, but a passion for the actual subject matter that you're teaching. And I think that's why people are really obsessed with that movie Dead Poet Society with Robin Williams, because Robin Williams's character embodies what a good teacher is meant to do. They instill a love of literature in these students, but more than that, he creates a community in the classroom and the students have a true experience. That's also, I think, the work of a good teacher. What we're talking about in relationship to teachers and mentors and anyone that can kind of fulfill that role, it stands in stark contrast to how a lot of magic and occult studies are framed. It's the occult, so it's hidden knowledge, it's esoteric, it's do the work on your own, sort of, is the expectation. Whereas a teacher, even if you only have one other person, it's us. It's now, instead of you doing it, it's us doing it together, even if we're a small little duo, companionship in whatever you're learning, which I think does help you.
Well, I'm curious. So growing up, you have teachers kind of just given to you or assigned to you is a better word in the education system specifically. However, I think when you consider magical spiritual matters, in a lot of ways, you yourself kind of find your own teachers or mentors. As an adult now, if I want to learn yoga, it's on me to find a yoga studio with a yoga teacher that aligns or resonates with me. Like, you have a more active role as the seeker in finding somebody that has been there before and that you want assistance or guidance from. And I think that's kind of an interesting thought, that you as the seeker or the aspirant have some degree of onus or accountability to finding your own teacher. And I'm curious if you think of that specifically in a magical context. You can find a million different gurus, but how do you find a guru that you want to listen to? How do you filter out the noise, I guess, to know who is an actual genuine teacher that knows their stuff versus charlatans or hucksters that are like, buy my book, buy my course, sign up for my 7-week course and I'll teach you magic, which that definitely exists. There's a lot of that kind of scammy stuff, for lack of a better word, that is out there in magical spiritual things. And that's how you get cult leaders that spring up. They kind of con people because people are interested in the area. And to your point, it's esoteric, it's hidden, it's a cult. So you can't exactly find a method or manual on how to do some of this stuff online. So then you do go out. I guess there's a lot of potential abuse. So there's some risk in looking for a teacher, I would say. I don't know if you agree with that.
I don't know that I would say there's a risk per se. I mean, I think that's a negative way of looking at it. I think it's hard to find a teacher for a variety of reasons, in part because you do need to find someone that resonates with you. And I do agree that because it's a spiritual anything spiritual, it's a ripe area for abuse because there's no way to prove that it's real. Just think about Scientology. That's a huge farce, basically, but it's conned a lot of people because people want to believe That's the key aspect. And when people want to believe, or like just think about the wellness industry, there's a lot of cons there because when people are sick, they really want to be well. And so that's sort of the tricky part, is that you are in a place of desperation. You're also a lot more vulnerable to those types of things. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to fully evade that. But I would say knowing something before you seek a teacher, I think is important. So like if you're interested really in anything, like if I'm looking for a yoga teacher, I should probably know something about yoga before I go searching for an in-person teacher. And that's a pro of the internet. You have a lot more access to that type of thing. And same in the occult stuff. You can read a lot of books and at least have a basic knowledge. So then if someone starts spouting a bunch of stuff, at least I know something, and maybe that'll help me, maybe it won't, but it might help me evade some of the quacks.
I think it's interesting though, because specifically with a teacher, I think there's a risk in any field. So yoga teacher or magical teachers, if you think of the Golden Dawn and these secret societies or lodges or all of these different groups, I guess my concern is, isn't there a risk by getting a teacher that you become dependent on another person? First of all, you can only take stuff as true if it's been validated by your teacher. So then you're automatically, there's a separation between your direct experience and what you know, because you're kind of filtering through this third party, this teacher. And then also, isn't there a risk of dogma, or I can't do X because my teacher said not to do this, but they might not be right either, which I think is the tricky part, where the teachers aren't omniscient. So there's room for error even in the teacher.
Yeah, what I would say to that is you should never put anyone on a higher pedestal than yourself. I think the tendency with a teacher, yeah, to your point, is this person needs to guide me through everything. So it becomes a codependent relationship at the very least. Anything I might need to do, I need to get their approval first and foremost. I need to make sure they're good with whatever it is that I'm doing in my life, which makes you not trust yourself and your own judgment and your own experiences. And this kind of goes back to what we said before, which you don't really need anything except for what's within. So yourself is the best teacher in many ways. And that's not to say that you can't and shouldn't look for teachers elsewhere. But I also think it's important to note that you should never have a student-teacher relationship that disrupts that relationship with yourself.
I like that. And it kind of reminds me again of, I like the phrase sensei, especially in light of it being, in light of it meaning one who has gone before. So if you take a yoga teacher, if they were your yoga sensei, if we use the different word, they are able to do a specific yoga pose that I'm trying to get to. You know more of the poses than I do, but let's say there's a very difficult pose that I want to master, and I know that specific yoga teacher or instructor can do the pose. So I know they're capable of doing it. They had to train themselves to get there, to be physically able or mentally able to perform the specific pose. So you can get a concrete certificate of proof, for lack of a better word. They know something that I don't. They can do something I am unable to do. And by them being able to do it, I will value their input. Maybe it took them 5 years to learn how to do this pose, and they're now saying, yeah, I spent a lot of time doing this stretch, and honestly, I don't think it was worth it. So I would just not waste your time with it. They've gone before. They might know a shortcut, or they might have pitfalls to look for that you would be unawares of without a teacher. I'm not trying to say there's no value in a teacher, I guess. Specifically in yoga, you could injure yourself if you stretch some way too far, or if you're not properly aligned. Maybe you blow out your knee because you're lunging and your form's terrible. Or even lifting weights, you want a spotter so you don't drop it on you and choke to death or whatever. There's value in having support.
Have you had any good teachers or mentors throughout your life? And if so, who were they and what kind of qualities did they embody?
I had a teacher, professor really in college, that for They taught tax of all things. But the thing that was interesting about this specific teacher I'm thinking of is he was living a pretty unconventional lifestyle, I would say. He was into FIRE, financial independent retire early, and was kind of the first person in the real world. I'd kind of heard about it online. He was the first person I'd met in the real world that did it. And he actually did it. So he would bike into class every day, and he did not live close. They had one car for like him and his kids and his wife. He bought a used car. Like, he was all about saving as much money as possible. And he would talk in class about, this is ways you can be smarter with your money. It was kind of just a way to reframe things in the world. And I thought it was interesting because he was more so opening up your eyes to possibilities as a teacher. He wasn't saying this is the right way to live or do this or that. What about you? Have you had any teachers or mentors?
I have, especially once I hit college. I had a lot of really great teachers, specifically English teachers, because I didn't start college as an English major. And because I had some really great teachers, that's partly what inspired me to change my major to English and pursue that. And yeah, so I mean, in grad and in undergrad, I had some really good English teachers, but I also think that I had other teachers through the form of books or even YouTube. I learned a lot of practicalities, but also just different ways of being, since I grew up in a very conservative area, and following people on YouTube just helped expand sort of different ways of being than what I was encountering in my high school life, if that makes sense.
It doesn't have to be just a teacher. We're really honing in on teachers, but it could be a mentor or an elder. And I think to some extent, we kind of lost that because, again, communities, you used to have like the town elders and you would all just be talking, but people are kind of fractured in their community. Like, I don't know any elders in this city, like besides my own family. There isn't a town elder that you could go to for questions or guidance.
You were really close with your grandpa, so I would say that literally counts as an elder relationship. You were like best friends with him, and I'm sure he taught you a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that my grandpa's a good example because I would ask him about random history stuff and he enjoyed talking about it. And I mean, it's not like he was a history professor or anything. And so like I would ask him about World War II or whatever, and he'd be like, oh, that's what this and this happened. And I always thought it was interesting because he knew so much. I didn't know anything as a kid. Somebody that I have a direct relationship with can give me firsthand account knowledge of what this was like, which I feel like is a lot more valuable than reading in a textbook what the Great Depression was like. It's like, okay, people were poor. But then when you read or you talk to your grandma or your grandpa that lived in that time or grew up in the aftermath of it, it's more striking to be like, oh, dang, yeah, like they didn't have any money. They hoarded money because they didn't know if they were going to have any more money. So they hid it or they kept it at their house. It's kind of interesting to get the human element of it. That's the personal impact.
Okay, question for you. And I'm kind of on the fence on this, so I'm kind of curious to see what you're going to say about this. Culturally, do you think we are moving away or closer to the student-teacher dynamic? And I say that because on the one hand, you have a proliferation of these Patreon-forward self-help guru retreat type things. And they're always like pay to enter, of course, never free. But then on the other hand, the one-on-one dynamic is lacking because even if you go to a retreat or you sign up for a class, it's a class setting. It's not a one-on-one, which I think, at least for me, has been some of the most powerful types of learning I have done. And I'm thinking also about independent study. It's somebody helping you with a project you are directly invested in. It's something you want to learn, but someone's helping you with it. That's a powerful way to learn. But people are also so independent and they don't want to listen to others. They're like, oh, I'm just going to do it myself the exact way that I want to do it. So do you have any thoughts on whether you think the student-teacher dynamic is rising or falling?
I mean, I certainly think it's falling, especially with the push for online courses, even just in regular schooling. They have like web courses and stuff. So it's less personal. It's not as much the teacher walking around desk to desk or even teaching in front of a class. It's watch these videos videos I made online and then ask me if you have a question. But that's kind of a different environment to watch a 30-minute math video and then ask a question later versus while they're teaching you for 30 minutes, you can ask as they're going the question. So there is something to being at least directly in the room while they're doing the teaching. But that kind of reminds me of something you were talking about where you said you learned and had, I think you called that online teachers when you were describing YouTube and stuff. Is that even a teacher at that point? If you're just watching a video, are you truly learning?
I mean, that's not really what I was watching on YouTube. I was more learning different ways of being rather than specific information heavy things. I mean, it just goes back to the question, which is, what is a teacher then? Is a teacher not somebody that is... I feel like here's an interesting thing. We live in the era of influencers. Would you not say that a teacher is an influencer? Because I would say they are, but they are supposed to be influencing in a specific kind of way. Because at least in my experience as a teacher, I heard horror stories from my students about how they had been traumatized by prior teachers. Teachers had told them, you can't write, you're never going to be anything. Here, write only in this super rigid structure. And that takes a huge toll on you, obviously, as a student, but also as a person. And so I just think even still, as a society, like teachers, it's a very important role, and it shouldn't just be any old person fulfilling that role, because a teacher really can make or break you as a student and as a person. So we should be thinking a lot more thoughtfully about some of these things.
I'm not sure that I would say that their job is to influence, though, because isn't that just indoctrinating then? Which is a kind of a slippery slope back to the whole idea of cults and stuff. Specifically, you see there's a whole argument on the education right now that we're living through. Should you teach X or Y? That is a genuine argument that people have in schools over the curriculum all the time, because it's an idea that teachers are shaping your mind. It's indoctrination.
If you're thinking about a public school teacher, that is their literal job. Here's the curriculum, teach it to the students. That's basically you're a propaganda agent. I'm serious though. That is your actual job. So what people are talking about now, you can't talk about gay people in school, or you can't teach people about certain things. I don't know. I mean, it's all caught up in these questions of what does the state say is okay to teach? What I was more so talking about in regards to being an influencer for teachers is, as a teacher, you have the power and ability to make a student interested in what they are learning and interested in learning in general through the environment that you are creating. So you're influencing them to use their critical thinking skills, to apply what you are teaching to their real life, everyday experiences. That's more so what I was saying.
It's tricky because I think really what a good teacher in my mind isn't teaching you what to think. They're kind of helping give you a framework for how to think.
I don't disagree, but is it not just splitting hairs? Because if you're teaching someone how to think, then you're limiting how they're thinking at the same time. If you think about the way they teach critical thinking in schools, it's still within certain frameworks. Oh, well, yeah, use your critical thinking skills, but don't go so far as to criticize the state in terms of how you're thinking about these things. I mean, is that not limiting in and of itself? And I guess that's what I'm saying. It sounds bad on the face of it to say a teacher is influencing, but I think in some ways we've been co-opted with that word with the influencer age, but I think that is a good word for it because the teacher is a powerful role, so it can be used for good or ill.
And I guess that's one of the things that is dangerous with teachers, and even in a magical sense specifically, if you're going to be dabbling with spells or summonings and stuff, if your teacher is telling you to do bad stuff like Crowley, maybe they're doing bad things. They could teach you how to do something, but that doesn't mean it's good. And that's kind of the risk. That's how you get cults where it's like, oh, I gave all my money to my guru because he claimed he needed the money. And we're all moving to Papua New Guinea. And then you have Jonestown. And it's like, whoa, what the heck is going on here? It starts somewhere. It starts with a church and a spiritual leader and they're whatever. They're charismatic and all of this stuff. And then that's how you get people doing insane things because they're following a teacher and they're getting indoctrinated and influenced into their specific worldview.
And a good teacher should teach you to question everything, including what the teacher is saying. So if I'm the teacher and I'm teaching you as my student, you should be thinking critically about everything, including what I'm saying. And if I'm saying something and you're like, I don't know about that, you should say something to me as the teacher. Okay, the student has outperformed the master, or whatever the phrase is, giving that elaborate Jonestown example. But didn't you literally have a teacher that taught you area and perimeter wrong?
Yeah, I had a horrific teacher I might have been 4th grade, but yeah, they were a terrible teacher. And I did this homework assignment. So she taught us perimeter as area. So like instead of adding all the sides of a square for perimeter, she was like, multiply them. And that's perimeter, which is actually area. So I was doing this homework and my dad was like, this is not right. That's not perimeter and not area. So we did it correctly, which was not the way I was taught. I got a 0 on the assignment because she marked it all wrong. Then the next day she came into class and she was, just kidding, everyone. I was actually wrong. I had them flip-flop. To your point, there is risk. A teacher is dangerous in some respect, especially if they don't know what they're talking about, but think they do, especially for young kids, because they're very malleable minds. You have no idea what's being taught to these kids or how they're being indoctrinated. It is a very important job. And do we have the best and brightest in these jobs? I don't know if you could say that by and large. I know it's a hard job. I'm not trying to like dump on teachers.
Well, societally, we are not incentivizing the right people to go into teaching. I would say,
what's the right person?
I'm not thinking like of any certain type of person necessarily. I'm more so saying that in pretty much every state, but specifically in southern states, for example, teachers are super low paying jobs. So a lot of people who would be great teachers don't even pursue those jobs because they can't live on that salary or whatever the case may be. They don't even see it as an option because it's too low paying and they have debt or whatever. So that's a huge problem though, because it's one of the most important things and it's a super low paying job. What is that saying?
So I want to mention too on the idea of teachers in pop culture and media. I always like the trope of a teacher that is kind of an old hermit, which I feel like is a very common trope in movies and books. So if I think of Aragon or Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi, like that old hermit guy that just lived weirdly off in the desert. And then it's like, oh yeah, Luke Skywalker, he's a Jedi master and he can train you. This wise old guy, or Yoda. They're supposed to be these wizened people that you don't really pay that much attention to. And then you start talking to them. Whoa, this guy's a wealth of knowledge, which I always thought that's always an interesting trope. But I also like specifically in books, schools are always prominent and people always love those. This is the assassin school, or this is the magical school of wizardry. If you're thinking of Harry Potter, there's always a training thing in books. And they always do a montage in movies to show how the person is being upskilled and trained. The idea of apprentices, I think, was a more common way of learning throughout history. Nowadays, if you go into a trade, you will have an apprenticeship and then you become a journeyman and then you're a master electrician or a master plumber or whatever. But most white collar career jobs that you think of don't really have a formal kind of training where you're on the job shadowing directly somebody to pick up the necessary skills.
College is that.
Is it though? Because if you're apprenticing for a blacksmith or an electrician, you're learning in the field. But college, it's very insular. You're learning in a academic institution. The person teaching you, most likely, that is their job. They're not doing
gatekeeping. That's what college is. It's saying, oh, you can only do this office job if you have this degree, and everything you learned in the degree, you're actually not using on the job. Anyone could do that job if they were trained. And that's the purpose of an internship. But internships have really gone away, or now they're completely unpaid, or there's no real route for you to go from intern to actually doing the job that you're sort of shadowing. And I do think that in general, people really look down on the trades, and I think that we should bring more awareness to that as a viable career option.
An apprenticeship is a better way of learning. It's hands-on in the field from the person directly. Installing electrical system in a brand new house, they're walking you through every step of the process versus school. Okay, maybe I learned how to do this one thing 2 years ago, but I never used it in practice. I just did a math problem in class on it.
Because most degrees have nothing to do with any actual job, with the exception of, I mean, there's still like medical residencies. So there are certain jobs where there is a component of that, but a lot of times there's this really vague degree like English, and then you could do anything with it, theoretically speaking. So it would be hard to train you on any one thing because college also touts the diversity of options that would be available to you. But the reality of it is that most jobs don't really require a degree, even though they claim that they do.
From a personal teaching history, you have been a teacher. Did you have any instances where people were coming up soliciting you for advice completely unrelated to the school subject? I'm trying to now speak to a teacher it's beyond the classroom. People will come up with personal issues because, for better or worse, teachers are an authority role, and people go to you when you're in that position for advice outside of the scope of your area of expertise. And how did you kind of handle that?
I mean, I don't know that really happened to me that much. I don't know that she was really asking me for advice regarding that. I think maybe she was. I can't remember. Somehow she mentioned it and I had to somehow get involved. It was more dealing with people's traumas, as I was explaining to you. People saying that they'd had teachers tell them that they couldn't write or that they were never going to be anything, that kind of thing. And I had to sort of counsel them through that experience. And then when I did teach creative writing that one time, there was some girl, we did some writing assignment where it was writing a poem. I believe it was writing a letter to someone that you had not spoken to in a really long time, and what would you say, or something to that effect. And that helped her deal with some unresolved trauma with her dad, which she later came up and told me about. But it's not that she necessarily solicited me for advice per se. But I would say it happens more in my day-to-day, everyday life. People will seek me out for advice. I'm not sure why, but they do.
Okay, so for my weekly wisdom, it's, quote, "The mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, the great teacher inspires." And that's by William Arthur Ward. And I thought that was a good one because I feel like there is a lot to that. Some people are teachers and they just should not be. A mediocre teacher tells, and there's some that don't even do that, right? Because they don't know anything. You lit up when I read that. So did that quote spark something within you?
That was my weekly wisdom.
So then that's definitely the weekly wisdom. I like the idea that they inspire. It's beyond just teaching curriculum. If you're inspiring somebody, you're getting them genuinely interested in the thing so that they are then wanting to learn more on their own outside of the class, or they're trying to find real world things that they can apply whatever it is that they've learned towards.
Well, this quote is also a good demonstration of the practice of teaching. Teaching is a practice. So you're not really going to start out as a teacher inspiring everyone from the get-go, because you're still learning how to do it and learning what works and what doesn't and what your specific style might be like. So I think that's also just a reminder. That's true of everything, right? Pretty much everything you do, you start somewhere and you end up somewhere else in terms of proficiency and ease and all of those things.
Well, hopefully we've inspired our listeners to listen again, to rate 5 stars, like, subscribe, donate. We don't have a donate.
That subscribe button.
Subscribe. Tell your friends, family, neighbors,
Teachers.
cats. Yeah, your teachers, your mentors, coaches, all of the above.
See ya.